The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hey folks, good afternoon. Welcome. We were just waiting for a couple of people more to sign in there. Let's just get my camera going so everybody can at least see who they're talking to for a little bit. Hi, good afternoon. My name's Steve Smith from Combined Knowledge. Welcome, welcome. We know a few people are probably just getting their calendars waking up at the minute, so hopefully the last few will start logging in a minute. Anyway, hopefully you're all enjoying this. Well, we've got a sunny afternoon where we are, so hopefully it's not too bad for everybody today, wherever you are. And thanks for joining us for this webinar this afternoon on the mastering the 3 challenges for modern collaboration. We're really trying to focus this. Well, I say focus this session, but we're trying to start this as a build-out set of sessions, and we'll talk more about that shortly around the sort of series of topics that we could potentially discuss in this particular field, because we want to be able to merge the context of the collaboration space, what's been happening in obviously this year in light of obviously everybody's challenges with the businesses, the rapid change and challenges that comes with that, and obviously these sorts of things are difficult to cover in the space of sort of 60 minutes maximum with Q&As and stuff like that. So one of the things we would be really appreciative of today from all of you is if, based on the stuff we're going to talk about today, if there's any topics that you would like to add or expand on that you like us talking about and would like to hear more about that in a lot more detail, let us know and feed that back to us, because we're definitely wanting to focus a little bit more around these topics over the next few months. A little bit of housekeeping for everybody. We are recording this. So bonus, so you will get access to be able to see all of this afterwards as well, and we'll make our slides available as well. And the main thing about this session is obviously it is an online session, so we are at the whim of the internet as always, but all being well, it should work okay. One of the reasons we're using GoToWebinar is that it is a little bit more sturdy currently in terms of when lots of people join and mass volume and everything else. And we are literally at the stage where the US is starting to log on. So we have noticed with things like Microsoft Teams, when you use Teams live events, that sometimes in the afternoon there can be a few glitches in terms of performance. But fingers crossed we should be good today. There are 2 of us in 2 different locations presenting, so if all else fails, one of us can hand over and take over for that. And what I'll do is I'll keep my webcam on whilst we're just doing this intro. After that, I'm going to switch it off because we're going to be flicking between presenters. So, and then I'll put it on at the end as well. So just to go through what we're covering today and who's here. So obviously it's Combined Knowledge from the collaboration and the adoption side, the skills, all that kind of stuff. That's what we do. And identity experts are from the security side, the device management, and making the best in terms of having users collaborate and yet securely, and making sure that you're not exposing and obviously having data being stolen and people being in dodgy Wi-Fi's and stuff like that. So we've got two different areas of expertise today that we're going to talk about in terms of this modern collaborative challenge that we're faced with. And at the end of the day, it is experience that helps us share this knowledge with you. And so from my perspective, I mean, I am the CEO of Combined Knowledge. We've been around for 18 years now as a company. We focus on collaboration and helping companies make the most of that collaboration through adoption, change management, skills, training, custom delivery, all that kind of stuff. And some of the things that we're going to talk about today is from our experience working with customers this year and the challenges that they've had with this modern collaboration and the way that's been forced on us. We'll share all our details later, and you're going to get copies of all of this as well. I'm also a Microsoft Regional Director, which for my sins basically means that Microsoft has certain regional directors in each country who represent certain verticals in the market that have got a lot of experience, history, talking to CEO, CTO level conversations. Microsoft chose me for the modern workplace side, and I represent sort of a conduit with Microsoft to the real world. So we get asked a lot of questions from Microsoft, go and have meetings with them and their execs around, what's going on, what are people saying, these kind of things. So feel free to feedback. If you want me to feedback some sort of high level execs to conversations, please feel free to post that in the chat as well. And just so you guys know, there is a chat and a Q&A available within the GoToWebinar. So if we're talking and explaining something and you'd like to ask a question, feel free to ask it in the chat. We will have a chance for a Q&A at the end of the session as well. So we've allocated sort of good 10-15 minutes to do a Q&A at the end. So please do make use of that, and we'll make sure that we go back to the questions as and when we can. We're also joined by Matt Fernandez from Identity Experts. Matt, is your mic working? Do you want to quickly say hello?
Afternoon, everybody.
So, yeah, carry on.
Go on. Yeah, my name's Matt. I'm CTO with Identity Experts, and as a business, our role is, well, in the name, it's identity. We deal with everything. The bread and butter, the joining, the moving, the leaving, the stitching of everything together for a nice, simple, easy experience, so that people can get to working and get to collaborating as quickly and as efficiently as possible.
Great. So one of the reasons why, when we've started working with Identity Experts and partnering up in recent months, and that's been a lot to do with, we have common partners that we work with and who are effectively customers now looking at building these integrated solutions or just trying to transition into the modern cloud workspace. We tend to find that, especially we found in recent times, that partners need to start working very closely together who have specializations in certain areas, because to build a true picture and actually get all the right pieces in play for a lot of the projects, it's very tough to find a partner that can do everything and do it well. And so having companies that specialize in certain fields who then work together is a really positive experience, certainly from a customer perspective. And Identity Experts, for example, being one of the leaders in the UK in terms of the gold partner roles within the security side. So us from a learning partner perspective, and then from a security identity perspective, very powerful combination. So what we're going to cover today, we're going to go into five areas really, and a quick intro where we're going to talk and set the scene for where we are and what's brought us to this conversation today. Why did we think about doing this webinar and some of the things that we want to talk about. So that's going to be a quick 5 minutes. Then we're going to do a quick 10 minutes, probably 2 minutes on each thing around choosing the right solution around today's modern workplace. So this is more about a conversational 10 minutes where we're just literally going to pick on 5 topics and just talk about those topics, and food for thought around, have you brought that into your framework or into your current discussions in terms of the collaboration move that you've probably had to deal with this year. Of course, once we've got those solutions in play and we start thinking about the type of solutions that we're dealing with, one of the key elements that everybody's having to deal with right now is securing those solutions. And Matt's going to drill into a lot of information there about some of the solutions that they've worked with in that space. And then what we'll do is flick back to myself at that point where we'll talk about getting your people on board. So we'll start thinking about some of the challenges that we've noticed, certainly in the recent months, around the adoption side, the onboarding, or just general user feedback and what they've seen and what companies have done wrong or done right that's helped that adoption take place. And then we'll have a chance for a Q&A at the end for 15 minutes. So as I said, please feel free to ask questions at any point during this. We may not pick it up straight away, but we'll certainly, myself and Matt will keep an eye out for it as it goes along. So I'm just going to stop my webcam briefly, just so that we can focus on the conversation rather than me. And let's get into the first area, which is really an introduction as to what's brought this on. I kind of, when I was thinking about this, I was like, almost stealing a bit of the Monty Python-esque approach to this, because in reality, this is a very, very strange year and has forced a lot of things onto a lot of people. And when we think, what has 2020 ever done for us? We could sit here and write a very long list, not just personally, but from a business perspective as well. But for me, I mean, obviously we're getting into the second half of 2020, but in the last 6 months, I've seen companies transition from a traditional office-based company with PCs at every desk, etc., using potentially a lot of file servers, still using SharePoint on-prem, and even to some degree analog phone systems still for a lot of companies. And they've shifted within the space of 6 months from a project that would normally have taken 2 to 3 years to it literally having to be, well, trying to do something within the space of 3 months. And in some cases, 60 days could become 30 days when something was really urgent in terms of that first 1 or 2 months of being in the lockdown. So what has 2020 ever done for us? Well, one of the things it has done is it's forced companies to reassess the way they work, but it's also forced the individuals to think about the way they work and the challenges that that brings in terms of not just where we're going to work and the environment that we're working in. So it's all very well saying we can work from home, but if I'm working from home and I've got kids trying to do schoolwork, I've got youngsters and babies or toddlers that would normally be at daycare, suddenly our world is very different, and the devices that we've got available to us or that we used to have in our office is also not going to be the same. So the amount of people that I've noticed that now are using a mobile phone using the Office 365 apps as a way to keep in touch, even if they've left their laptop on a desktop and maybe they've moved to, look after one of their kids for a while because they're playing kind of swapsies with their partners in terms of looking after the children for an hour or two. The amount of times you suddenly have a conversation with somebody and they're using the mobile app to do some collaboration around Teams or joining a meeting, whatever it might be, that is a huge shift overnight for the way a lot of people have worked. And I think a lot of companies have struggled with both the adoption, making the most of that, people leveraging the power of these apps to do that work, but also potentially losing some of the collaborative capabilities because of that. Because previously they had a desktop app, they were using a nice big couple of screens at the office. They had all these different things happening on the desktop apps, and suddenly they're using these mobile apps or these web versions of the file of the systems, and it's not quite looking the same or quite working the same. So there's certainly been some positive sides to 2020 in the sense that it's forced businesses to have to bring in a modernization of their methods of working. People have suddenly started going, we're not going to be working from the office again. We're going to literally initiate a full working remote initiative from now on. We might end up losing 4 floors of our 6 floors in London, and we don't need those 4 floors anymore. So the positive side of this is companies have realized that by actually initiating the modern workplace and the remote working, that suddenly we can do it. There have been some challenges along the way, and there are still a lot of challenges to go, and we're going to talk about some of those today. But of course, the benefit is that suddenly we are in this situation, like the chap there in the field sitting on the chair, is that suddenly we've got this ability to obviously be somewhere where we wouldn't normally be, yet be able to still stay in touch and continue to work. And that's a very powerful message that we're being able to spread and convince people is worth doing once we've got over the fact that do we trust where people are actually doing their job. So from a challenge perspective, that has brought along quite a lot of challenges, though. It's all very well and good saying we've had to do it, we've been forced to do it, and that was a good thing. But the challenges that came with that have been quite immense, and for some companies it still is, even now, a logistical nightmare for some companies depending on what sort of verticals you're in. And obviously I'm assuming everybody on the call today, I'm sure you'll all be coming from lots of different verticals, but for some businesses some of the biggest challenges is when suddenly cloud, as in we're moving to a cloud service very quickly, was deployed instantly. There is, with very little consideration, concern, or planning for, security mechanisms, user skills, etc. So that was a huge challenge for a lot of companies, but they just had to light it up because, we need to do meetings. holy smokes, let's just get Teams going. Bang. Let's use Microsoft Teams. Does anybody know what they're doing? No, but we'll figure it out. And Microsoft Teams is obviously a lot more than that, but we just did that for that reason. And of course, there are other things that happen because of that, and I'll talk about that in a bit. Companies' change management process was not aligned to this challenge. This was a huge one, actually. A lot of companies, certainly larger enterprise companies that operate a lot slower than, they take time because they have to have due process considerations that take place when they build projects and project management and all the different things that happen in a cycle of a change management framework. Suddenly they went from, doing a framework over 2 years, having to do it in 2 months. That was huge, and there wasn't a plan ready for that. There was nobody could have put a plan in place for what happened. So that process was very slow to catch up to speed with the technology that was needed to be deployed, which therefore created challenges. And I would say companies would be reluctant to turn certain things on because they hadn't got the process in place. So they basically switched a lot of things off to restrict some of the exposure the users were getting. And also, obviously cloud companies who were providing these security options to help with the use of the technology, the cloud companies were saying, hey, look, we've got all these solutions that you can deploy. You can switch them on your Office 365 tenant. In fact, we would recommend that you switch some of these security elements on. And Matt's going to talk more about that in a bit. But the problem is that there were no skills internally. The users had no idea what it meant if you suddenly turn some of these things on, and things could just appear that they weren't ready for. And maybe there was software that was being used on premises for security, and suddenly there was this cloud security model that was very different and acted very differently for the users. And that whole transition, which normally would happen over, say, 3 to 6 months in terms of a technical and adoption and training perspective, was suddenly being forced within weeks. And therefore, even though the cloud companies provided the software, the companies weren't able to make use of it. And so one of the things we want to make sure we get over to you guys today is what some of those options are. And lack of skills was a huge problem in terms of the user adoption. And by having user issues, obviously that leads to potential security holes where people just don't know they're exposing data. And that can, again, be a big challenge for some areas of adoption. We'll talk about that in a minute, in a bit more. But these were some of what we saw as some of the biggest business challenges in 2020 because of that sudden take up of the cloud, or moving to certain apps that they weren't using before, and suddenly everybody was using it en masse as a company. So choosing that right solution is key, right? So when we talk about the different apps and solutions that are out there for cloud capabilities, it is really important that your business chooses the right one. And when we think about sort of 5 key pillars in choosing that solution, Matt and I were chatting about this, and really it boils down to sort of 5 key sub areas that you need to consider to make sure it is going to work and your business will adopt it, and it actually provides business value, because it's no use just switching stuff off and saying we're going to use this if at the end of the day, 2 years down the road, everybody can't find anything, or data's been stolen or exposed or lost, or you've just got too much data. So a lot of these things are key to the long-term adoption of the technology that you've moved to. Because one thing we can clearly state here is that there's no way people are going to go back, right?
There's something I'd chip in here quickly and say as well, that where we've identified these key pillars, it's really important to realize that, I mean, these aren't in any particular order. There is no one size fits all for any business. And when people are looking for solutions, they need to take into account actually what their priorities are. If I am a graphics designing business and I need lots of designers to be working on a single piece, then actually my collaboration needs are going to be way up there, followed then by the devices, because I need to make sure that they're all up to spec, that everyone's going to be able to do what they need when they need to, and they're going to have access to everything. But governance actually might be a little bit further down the ladder, not necessarily not important, but not as critical as actually having the equipment and the processes in place for people to be able to work together and actually keep the business running. Whereas if we're in, financial or we're in banking, then actually that governance and the security, they're going to be way up, and actually user experience can take a back seat because, I mean, we've seen, like in Tesco's, the tills, some of them are still running Windows XP. They're not so fussed about the user experience because these old mainframes have been running the same thing for the last 30 years, and they're not in a hurry to change. But if any of those things were to be compromised from a security standpoint, that then is a big deal for the business. So as people look at this, understand what they actually need themselves, and use these as a way that they can then map out points against which services they're going to be identifying to see which one is actually going to be the best fit.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I think it's really important from our perspective, in our experience this year, is I would suggest to all of you that if you've not considered these 5 kind of structural requirements for your solution logic, that you should at least have these 5 as a starting point in that conversation. And if you haven't, maybe you might have looked at things like collaboration needs and devices, so that you're thinking about how can, like I said before, you might have these people that are sat all over the place using different devices in different locations. Can they collaborate? Are they collaborating? Is it working? The user experience becomes important, but then the flip side of that is, how are you securing that data? How are you securing those devices? So you might be doing 3 of the 5 things right now, but you might be missing 2 of those things. In reality, you will need to start thinking about these as part of the going forward plan for getting your collaboration right. So the challenges that we're finding right now for a lot of companies, certainly this year where they've been forced into this modern collaboration stack, is they may be doing 1 or 2 of these, whereas they should be doing 3 or 4 of these things, and they haven't yet got around to it. And so we're definitely finding that is becoming a key problem. And I'll give you a good example of this. A company we were working with recently, they literally just switched on Microsoft Teams because they needed to have everybody using meetings. So as we know, Teams went up like bazillions, millions of users suddenly started using Microsoft Teams. That's great. The user experience was okay. They didn't really know what they were doing, but it was okay. Enough to get them through it. But they had 0 governance in part of this planning. So one of the challenges that they faced in this collaborative world was they started off okay, but because there was no governance, within about 45 days, they suddenly found that they had 700 Microsoft Teams being created for everything from a single file that they were sharing with one person to 6 teams that were created with basically the same name for the same purpose and the same collaborative group, but they didn't realize that obviously that somebody else had already created it. So without governance, the collaboration started to work, but over time the user experience became confusion because they didn't now know where to go. So over the last 2 months, that solution that was started off being correct, but because they didn't use one of these other key areas of design, then became a problem. So I would always say, in today's world, right now, where we are, companies need to have a real quick, hard look at, are they dealing with these 5? Are they relevant? And which bits should they be dealing with that they're currently not really investing time and effort in? That would be my experience from that so far. Matt, do you want to add to that?
Definitely. I guess my final thought on this would be that no one is going to be perfect. This is always going to be a journey and an iterative process. Case in point, with what's happened this year, like you said, people have been forced into this in a very rapid kind of adoption cycle. And so as we're moving through this and people are settling down into, I know people love the phrase, the new normal, people are actually having to now take a step back and look around and going, okay, well, I know we put duct tape over the cracks in order to get this stood up and working, but now we need to go back to the beginning and make sure that we're actually doing this properly.
Right. Yeah, good point. Well, why don't we move on to oh, hang on, I need to go back. Why don't we get you? Let me present over to you. So I'm just going to hand over, folks. Just bear with me one sec whilst we make Matt present to you guys. So I'm just going to make Matt the
Do the old
presenter.
switcheroo.
Yeah, and then Matt's going to share his slides on the next section around ways to achieve some of the fixes to these solutions. There we go. Oh, you were there.
Oh, hang on.
There
I
we
think
go.
I'm back.
Yeah, there we go.
Fabulous. Okie dokie. So, as introduced earlier, hello, my name's Matt. I'm CTO for Identity Experts. Feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn or follow me on Twitter at SecureBadger. The history to that is purely because there was a fad for a while for IT firms to choose an arbitrary word and an animal or a color, like Blue Fox 6. It was very dynamic. And I like security and I like badges, so that became my Twitter handle. I am into security. I'm into cloud security, and I'm also into collaboration and automation. I love being able to join the dots and make it so that everyone can work together easily, but also in quite cool and awesome ways. I like being able to utilize a lot of the technology in the background so that when people are just doing their day-to-day tasks, it's just seamless and it works, and they don't realize under the hood actually how much cool stuff is happening because they just want to get on with their jobs. Outside of my IT world, I'm a beekeeper, and as you can tell from the hat, I spend some time outdoors building fires and eating bushes. So I am both a combination of new world and old school, and my parents are fairly insistent that I was actually born in the wrong era and I'm from the past. So enough about me. A bit about us, and my slides aren't moving on. There we go. So we are Microsoft Gold Partner. We have a number of partners we also work with outside of Microsoft, and what we tend to think of ourselves is the glue in the middle of lots of different specialities. Rather than being a jack of all trades, we specialize in a very specific thing, and we bring partners together who are also specialists in their field, so that when we approach a situation, we literally have the best minds available to be able to tackle that problem. So we cover everything from on-prem identities from your old school, you know it, Microsoft Identity Manager. For those who don't Google it, it'll be a very, very boring evening for you. It's a very fundamental piece of software that throws identities around, but it's quite a dry rabbit hole unless you're into that kind of thing. All the way up to the new fancy cloud stuff, where we're doing everything with the Microsoft 365 suite, again with identities, with security, devices, and then we've got choice partners such as Combined Knowledge, who we will do education with. We've also got partners that do additional device security or kind of SOC services, and really all we're about is trying to find the best thing to fit the solution that is best tailored for the problem at hand. So we've talked a little bit about those pillars, about finding the right solution. And a solution is great, but actually there's something that underpins this, and that is how you actually go about using those solutions. And we've been using in the security, so it's quite a tried and tested thing at the moment called zero trust. The idea that, well, that's it, we don't trust anything. So we know that there is stuff hitting us all the time, different attack vectors. But what we need to make sure, especially now that we're working remotely, we used to have it was nice and easily contained. We would have people in an office behind a firewall in a nice little protected bubble. If they wanted to access the files on that server, that was fine because they were on the same network. We knew everything about every machine and every person within that building. Not so much at the moment. We've got people working from iPads in the park, at home, at the pub. We've got people, on their phones who are trying to join meetings and work on documents together, and maybe on the train, or people watching over their shoulders and doing whichever. So how do we now make sure that those people are, well, A, who they say they are, and B, working on devices that we know are secure and meet the standards required to access the data? And this is the idea of zero trust. So the concept is that we will never trust and we will always verify. So it does not matter who the user is. It could be the cleaner, it could be the CEO. It does not matter what device they are using. It doesn't matter where they are. We will always do something to double check that it's them, that it's okay, that it's safe. So a lot of this is underpinned by kind of like a conditional access model. As a business, we will set certain policies and we will say, if you conform to this policy, then we'll let you in. If you don't conform to this policy, then depending on how serious it is, we might require additional validation. So if I'm on my mobile at home and I've nipped round to my friend's house, socially distanced of course, but I need to check my work emails, because I'm suddenly in an unusual location, that's not necessarily risky enough to block me out completely, but it might then just say, oh, I just want to double check that you're not somebody else who's nicked the phone, who's now trying to access some of the corporate data. So we'll do a multi-factor. So there's an additional check, either with a biometrics or a PIN or something, that has to be verified before people can get access. This fundamentally is the easiest and the quickest way to be able to secure collaborative working in this day and age. Multi-factor, true multi-factor, has been known. I think the stat is 99.9% of attacks against an account are mitigated by multi-factor, because it doesn't matter if I could publish my password on this webinar right now to all of you. I'm not going to, but I could, and I would have confidence that none of you would actually be able to get into my account, even though you've got the password, because we've got these risk-based analyses, we've got the multi-factor in place that actually knows to a certain degree that it's not me that's doing it and that it's unsafe, and so it will automatically block this kind of stuff. So this is really, really important when it comes to specifically, your documentation, your IP. If you're working on sensitive things, or you're trying to collaborate on documents that maybe you don't want to be left on a USB stick and left on a train somewhere. I'm looking at you, Heathrow. You can protect these things. You can have these document controls that travel with the documents. You can have these checks in place to make sure that the people accessing it every time. I mean, if you want to go to a completely granular level, you can use a product called Microsoft Information Protection. You can put a label on a document, and you can have it happen automatically or based on a load of cool rules. But what this does is it encrypts the document, and that encryption travels with the document no matter where it goes. So if I sent a Word document with all of the super secret information and nuclear codes and credit card information and stuff to Steve, and I said, right, okay, this is encrypted and only Steve on this account is allowed to open this, I can be secure in the knowledge that that is the case, and that it doesn't matter if that file goes out in the wild. It could be left on the USB stick, it could be given to a nation state to do whatever they want with, but unless they have access to the account with the permissions, they will never be able to get into that document. They will never be able to decrypt it. And on top of that, there's actually, tying into the audit and the governance, tracking on that. So every time someone tries and fails, you can then get an alert to say, hey, check this out. In this country, this person tried to crack into your secrets. And then you've got the option. You can say, all right, we'll leave that in the wild and we'll see what they can do. Or you can say, well, actually, I kind of want to knock this on the head. So wherever you are, wherever the document is, whether it's been copied or whichever, you can hit a button and that will, Mission Impossible style, self-destruct that file. So even though they couldn't get into it, now they can't even try. They can't even open it. It's dead. And so if this is, it's something that people are genuinely trying to work on, and there's a genuine scenario where they need access, it forces them to come back to you so that you can control the data flow. So this combined with what I was saying around the conditional access, where we can then see who, when, where, and how, really helps us kind of control what's going on while allowing people to actually, work together. So where we were saying that, yes, this is a journey. Yes, these pillars might be different for different businesses, but this is it. This is very much a case of you need to pull out, not necessarily by product. We don't want to go out and say you must use Symantec, you must use Microsoft, you must use Palo Alto, and throw all of your eggs in those baskets, because that actually might not be what's best for your business. It might not be what's best for your wallets. What it is better to do is to identify actually what your key needs are now, medium, long term, what you can get in your quick wins, and actually work out and map that to the products that are out there to say, well, okay, right now we can do this with these products, and that will underpin this area of security or enable our users to do certain things. So, a nice easy one on here, a short term for self-service password reset. This is, it's a nice simple thing. Now that people are working away, if people had to log a call or log a ticket into a help desk system in order to get access to an application, we'll use Office 365. It's very easy now to enable self-service password reset. So all of those help desks calls are wiped out. And there's a business we worked with a year or so ago, and we enabled this for them, and they worked out that every year that saved them £21,000 just in the help desk calls for password resets. And that's a pretty good saving. I mean, that paid for the licenses and then some, which essentially meant all the other features they got were free, which is pretty good. But it goes a step further. So, okay, we've got self-service password reset now for Office 365. Fantastic. What about the rest of them? I use all these other SaaS apps. I've got my HR system. I've got, I don't know, Trainline or an expense system, all these other things. What about that? In order to make the user experience easier for people, it's possible to have all of those apps onboarded into the one place, to have the single identity to rule them all, as it were. So when, from a user experience perspective, I log on in the morning, I open up my computer, I connect to the internet, I am presented with a screen with all the little panels of my different applications, and it doesn't ask me for another password, because verification has happened in the background, so that when I've signed into the machine, it knows it's me. It knows the machine is compliant. It knows it's secure. It knows it's up to date. And then when I'm trying to access the applications, because all of these checks have already been done, there's additional checks about location or risk levels and other things, or activity in other systems. So rather than asking you for a password, it does these checks and then single signs you on. So if all of these applications are then integrated with something like Azure Active Directory, you get that really seamless experience of being able to move between applications from lots of different vendors, with everything being backed by the underlying security of your Office 365 and your Azure systems, with your conditional access and your hashed passwords. And there's another, it's a super cool feature as part of the Azure AD stack, which is Azure AD Identity Protection. And it kind of sits in the background. It doesn't really present itself too much to users. But one of the amazing things about it is that Microsoft will actually trawl about, and if like these lists of passwords, like if there's been a big data breach and someone's put up a big list of passwords on the dark web, Microsoft will actually obtain a copy of this list. And if you've got your passwords synchronized and hashed, because Microsoft know how they hash those passwords, they don't actually need to know what your password is, but they will take this list of stolen passwords and run it through the same algorithm and then check the hashes. And if any of them match, they will then go and alert that user and say, hey guys, you've been compromised. Your password's been picked up on one of these lists. You might want to do something about that. Maybe change this password, maybe go change some of your other passwords, because that's pretty risky. And that's wicked. So you can actually just be going about your daily life, and if your Flickr account has been compromised, or there's a fantastic website called Have I Been Pwned, and you can pop your email address in there, and they will alert you if you come up against any of these breaches, and send you an alert and say maybe you want to change your password. And this is doing that now for your business stuff as well, so that the business now has security to know that actually if a user is using the same password for their business stuff as they are for some of their personal stuff, if any of that stuff gets breached or surfaces on the internet, that account is going to be protected. And you can have it so that that happens automatically. This has been detected, boom, that account's disabled. Sorry, contact the help desk. There's been a security breach. Or you can have it so it prompts them the next time they log in to change their password. There's loads of cool stuff you can do. But again, it's about identifying. So which part of the journey are you on? Which parts of the journeys are most important to you? And then how do you apply that in the way that gets you to where you want to be? Not necessarily, speed is a thing, but actually we want it to be seamless. We want it to be easy to users, and we want it to be secure. There's always that difficulty between the balance of security and user experience. The most secure machine in the world is the one that's actually turned off in a safe underwater, because no one can access it to try and compromise it. But actually to log into that machine to write a Word document is nigh on impossible. So there's got to be some give and take, which is why the risk-based features and the zero trust approach of having this constant verification every time something is done, alongside the identification and the classification of data, is really important. As another kind of aside that is really quite topical right now, a lot of people are aware of something called virtual private networks, VPNs. And the concept for these is very simple. This basically is a Star Trek style wormhole that connects your internet to your network to a network somewhere else. So it will punch through the internet and it will connect my house to my office. Great. So people can't now see in and see what's going along on that traffic. It's basically like I'm in the office. So when we come to it, and suddenly now a business of 20, 30, 40,000 people now all have to work from home. The systems that were in place for this remote work that normally would only deal with maybe 5 or 10, 20, maybe 100 people off at a time, maybe someone in France watching Netflix over or BBC iPlayer because they want to be able to see the British stuff and they have to connect back into England to be able to watch that. But now suddenly it's being absolutely hammered by everybody, and in a lot of instances these appliances would just fall over. There's no way they could handle that amount of traffic, and to scale up those services rapidly to be able to handle that would cost an absolute fortune. So there's alternatives. There's ways in which you can lessen the load. If you've got things in the cloud, you can look at diverting traffic, so only the critical stuff that is needed to go to your on-prem network goes there. You can integrate things with Azure AD, as I mentioned, and they've got a cool thing. So if you've got an application behind your network that's on-prem, it doesn't face the internet at all, but it's web-based, and so your users will log onto a portal and check some stuff out. You can actually proxy this and make it available to them remotely, and instead of then having to spin up a VPN tunnel and having all the traffic run through that, a secure proxy is used to surface that to them at home. So instantly, if you've got line of business applications, you can, in some fairly rapid steps, offload all of that network traffic, allowing the equipment to breathe, and meaning that you don't have to put quite such an investment in. And actually, that shift towards that kind of hybrid, the secure hybrid way of working, extends the life of your on-prem networks while preparing you for the future of all the fun stuff that is yet to come. I am aware, however, that time is marching on. So, Steve, do you have anything to chip in on this?
Actually, I'm going to cover some of it in the next section that you've exactly been talking about. So, shall we move on to the next section? Are you ready to move on?
Sounds good.
Thank you very much. That was super, Matt. So I'm just going to take back over control. Yeah, we're doing okay for time. So if we think about the first two things that we've kind of focused on here so far, we've talked about the solution, which is making sure we get the combination right of these solutions, and how we're trying to drive that collaboration, whether it be using a particular device and what that collaboration need is, but then making sure that that governance and security aligns to it. But knowing the solution mapping to the security element is critical, as you've heard from Matt, because ultimately we've got to get our people on board with it and we've got to be using it. So in this section, I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the things to think about that you may not have done yet. You may have done some of it, and it's just helping you to kind of pick up a few bits and some pointers to get you started in that journey to get it right. I mean, obviously the obvious one is have a plan. I'm not really saying that just in jest. You can't just throw a piece of technology into that workforce and expect it to be used correctly or in line with a company set of previous policies. So just because you had a way of working and policies, 18 months ago, and you've suddenly had to move to this mass remote process, everybody's suddenly working on various machines and technology. You might have asked people to work on their home machine. Well, going back to Matt's point about how do you trust people, or how do you trust machines? How do you trust the antivirus software that they've got on that home PC or their iPad that they're using? Suddenly we've got people being asked to use technology to work remotely. So if we just throw the technology out there, or we just throw the software like Microsoft or whatever, some cloud technology at the users and say, there you go, folks, let's collaborate. The answer is people aren't really maximizing the collaboration. We're kind of fudging our way through it, but productivity and collaboration is definitely suffering. And as is the fact that the companies don't actually have a plan of how to secure those devices and that communication, as Matt was just alluding to. So what we're finding through our various conversations with customers, and I'm really focusing on this year really, because this year has thrown a lot of these conversations in very quickly. Historically we would have worked with a company on an adoption program who were going through this journey, and we might be doing it over 18 months or 6 months or 9 months and doing it in the right time frame. We kind of got to a point now where we're going it retrospectively. So if we look at things like onboarding tips, one of the things that I would recommend to everybody to do if they haven't started doing it yet, especially based on the things Matt was just talking about, is start looking at what that policy and governance structure would look like. So if you're going to start having people who are going to be traveling around with their mobile phones, then what is your governance policy around that as a business? What are you going to use as technology to drive that? And who's going to be responsible for it? So ownership is a key thing here, and depending on which area we're looking at determines who's going to own it within the business. But if everyone can create anything anywhere, and you leave that as it is for the next 12 months, so a good example of that would be, say, Microsoft Teams. So everybody says, I'm going to create a Microsoft Team, as I said earlier, and we just start creating teams everywhere. You're going to have sprawl. Sprawl comes with security concerns, sharing concerns, who does what where, duplication of content, data being stored in all the wrong places forever, and actually trying to bring all of that stuff back 12 months down the line could suddenly become a really costly and expensive job. So building a policy and a governance structure and then applying it to the data and the way you're working now can actually save you an awful lot of expenditure and cost later on, which is what, again, Matt was kind of alluding to that earlier, which is you can actually save money using this technology now if you're using it right. So you should actually be saving money in the long term. It shouldn't be costing you more. One of the things that we do say as well, which is really important and a really key point about what Matt was saying in the securing side, is that when you start to give people this capability to use technology in different ways, you've got this log on screen, you've suddenly be presented with this different log on because maybe you're sending some data using an encrypted label or something. How are you going to make your users be aware of what these things are? So you can go off and start setting up security principles and conditional access policies, email restrictions and policies around that using different labels. So does a user know what to do when they get those things? Does a user know what to do, how to apply that label? So when we start to think about setting up some of these secure pieces that are important and must be done, think about building an onboarding process that you can reach out to your user base to make them aware of it. So you've got some kind of communication strategy. So you could use things like Yammer and email tips and tricks, or some kind of online sort of buzz session. Use things like Teams live events to do like, the business is going to present, we're introducing this new way of locking down data. Here's the things to think about. Keep them short and sweet as well. Don't try to make it last forever. So, maybe 45-minute session, something like that. Keep the users engaged, constantly keep them aware of things that are happening and what they need to be aware of. So when they see it, it's not something that they're just like, oh my gosh, what do I do? I've got no idea. Also, think of the fact that some users digest information in different ways. So some people might still read an email, keep it on their inbox, put it in a folder so they can always go back to it, so they always remember it. Some people might use things like Yammer app so that they can go to the conversations, and other people like watching videos that talk them through it, so that's the way that they watch. I mean, anybody who's got any kids under 20, you'll know that they literally live on YouTube for all their information. So one of the things that we've noticed is that sort of on-demand videos is a really good way of getting certain generations on board with how to use technology and the change that they're going to see and get. So think of these onboarding tips as ways to keep that your business engaged. And this isn't a one-off thing. I mean, regular focused communications could be a weekly thing. You might find that service desk, for example, keeps saying, hey, we keep getting these same requests every time. Why do I see this? Why do I see this? Or how do I fix this? So when service desk comes back with that, they should communicate that back to the comms team and the help desk team. And then that could be pushed back out in terms of comms internally on what it is that they should do and what to expect when they see that. So when we get to that point, we start talking about key drivers of adoption. Think about the skills, because people need to know how to use this stuff, right? So have a champions network, build your service desk that is going to support those issues like risky logons, or you've been compromised, that kind of stuff. Make sure people know how to use it. And don't block features that aid collaboration, so just because people can share externally, some companies will turn around and say, we're not going to enable labels because we don't know how to do it. So we don't want to set up labels and encrypt data. So therefore, we're just going to stop externally sharing because that's easier. It might be easier, but it's totally not helping the way we're currently working and the way we're going to be working a lot more. So always make sure that you're not driving technology blockers through, say, IT because they've got a skills block. Better to solve the skills problem and then actually make use of the technology, but put the security wrapper around it. And then build focus workshops around those so that we can have those sessions where the users feedback information that they'd like to use, or some of the challenges they've got in the technology and how we can solve that, and build those guides into custom sort of how-to ways of working videos. Users really like those because it helps them to understand how it all stitches together. And then obviously you've got an onboarding program for new starters as well down the road. And a key thing that we found that a lot of users have really asked questions about this year when they've been thrust into all of these apps in Office 365 is when to use what. So you need to make sure you deal with that in terms of that communication strategy. Build some simple wins. I heard Matt say this earlier. I want to re-emphasize that. I've got it in mind as well. when you're building some of these integrated features, think about the simple things that will work really quickly for a lot of users and roll those out quickly. If you're going to use, if you want to start using new meeting methodologies, make sure you're aligning it to a Teams channel. Make sure that you've got things like OneNote for note taking, and use tabs in Teams to put data and other contextual information in there, because that way everything's kept together and people have a historical information and follow up from that meeting. It's not just here's a meeting, let's chat, and then 2 days later everybody's having to spend hours writing it all up. Spoke to somebody yesterday, works for a big retail company. They said they spend all day in meetings and then they spend 2 hours after all the meetings writing it all up and putting stuff back into the Teams to keep everybody up to date. If it's part of the team, if it's part of the meeting, it all gets stored in the channel. Make things simple. When I explained this to her, she's like, oh my gosh, that's just saved me hours of work every day. Introduce some other features like Power Automate to simplify automation where possible. Automation and AI is going to really start helping with this stuff going forward. Not necessarily something you need to drive at right now, but as you start to get more experience with the new ways of working, bringing these tools in will really help. And then Matt mentioned things like conditional access policies and some of these simple security things that we can put in place around passwords and stuff like that. So using tools like Intune can really help with that automated device management, deploying apps onto the user's devices so that they don't have to think about it and actually don't have passwords anymore. Change it to PIN numbers and biometrics. So users are actually moving away from the whole password theory. That way, we can actually get apps and devices really using a common trait, which is what we're seeing in the banks at the minute, which is, use your thumbprint to sign in. We've sent you a PIN verification to your text number that's registered with it. Put that in to verify you are who you say you are. These things will help simplify that security journey for the users. And that's a really key part.
So I'm going to chip in quickly there as well on the subject of Power Automate. The Power Platform that Microsoft have coined, which is Power Automate, which was formerly known as Flow, Power BI, Power Apps, and there's another one as well. Power something or another.
Oh, you Power Virtual Agent. Yeah, Power Virtual Agencies.
Yes. Yeah. Now, Power Apps are so unbelievably powerful. You can literally, the phrase citizen developer, hopefully people have come across this, which is a codeless way of being able to develop apps that solve a business need that anybody in the business can say, oh, I've got this great idea. Here's this process. It is taking me a really long time. Wouldn't it be great if there was just like a simple app that would automate some of these tasks for me? And I'll use an example because I love it. It's one literally that we've just gone live with internally now. We have somewhere in the region of 300 to 400 teams running, and we have different access requirements at different times. And previously we had this as a dynamic thing based on groups, so that if you had certain attributes, you would be added. But what this ended up with was that some people had access to 200 teams that they were never actually going to use, and it was, it was a headache to navigate. They were finding it difficult to find things. They were losing documents. It was a hassle. And so what we've done instead is we've used Power Automate and Power Apps to actually create a self-service flow for this, so that people can actually, within Teams, open up a simple branded app and say, I would like access to this app or to this team, please. Here is my justification for it. And when they hit submit, that goes through an approval process through Power Automate, which reports back and is audited so that there's a history of it. And then that, whether that's approved or denied, is reported back. And so within minutes, I think our record so far has been 36 seconds. Someone's gone from not having access to a team and all its channels and its SharePoint libraries to being able to join in and collaborate on a project. And all of that then is governed and audited so that if something happens and it needs to be reviewed, then the data's there and you can see exactly what's happened and you can diagnose problems as well. And so for something that, for say project managers, that would normally be a headache, making sure that people have the right access to the right things at the right time, now we can offload back to the people. Oh, you're doing this task, you need access to this, great, crack on. You can see all the things that there are, ask for access, and your manager or a project manager or some other thing will approve you and you'll get instant access. It's fantastic.
Yeah, great example. And we could probably do a whole session on power on that Power Platform actually. So if you folks are interested in that, feed it back to the email you got to join the meeting. Obviously, there's you received an email from for the joining instructions. You can obviously contact us through those emails, and we can spread that about. I realise we've literally got to the end of the time, and we haven't even had a chance for lots of Q&A. But we will hang on. I mean, we've got no reason to rush off for a second. But I will actually just stop the recording on there because it's 4 o'clock.